All right, want to welcome everybody aboard the crazy train. We're heading down Montgomery, Alabama, where Senator Dale Marsh thinks he knows a little something about education, and he's going to be proposing a bill when the session starts on February 2nd. Bill is going to be addressing performance pay, tenure, and tying students' test scores to the evaluation process. Be sure and take a look at this meme study, what the two different tracks are that you're going to have to choose from. Mostly, though, this video is going to be about the evaluation process because it's pretty complicated. Let's jump right in with the students' test scores. As y'all know, it'll be tied to your evaluations, but what you may not be aware of is not only the scores that the student earns that year, but they're going to take the last 3 years of scores for that individual child, for every individual, and they're going to put those numbers into a computer, and that computer is going to predict how well that child should do in your class that year, because you know that is so predictable. Children are definitely predictable. So this computer is going to say, you know what, they should score X amount, and if the child does not score that amount, even if they actually do increase their score, if it's not by as much as the computer says that it should be, then you can still get dinged on your evaluation, which is what this teacher in Florida found out. Mr. Luke Flint, he is a 6th grade teacher. He had a student who was extremely talented. He didn't think she was going to be any problem at all, and she wouldn't have been if the computer hadn't predicted that she's going to do better than the test than she could even possibly do on the test. It said she was going to do 286. Problem was, the test only went up to 283, and so even though she got a perfect score on the test, it still dinged him. It still hurt him by 3 points. That's the way VAM works. That's why it is not held in high regards by any reputable organization. Please study it, do your homework, Google it, Google Mr. Flint's name, find out more about that story. You're also going to find other stories of music teachers being evaluated on math scores, on teachers being evaluated on children that they never even had. But that's what this is leading to with this value added measure. When you have computers trying when you have computers, they say are predicting student test scores. I mean, it can't be that the system's flawed, and the computer's going to be right. And so if the children don't perform at the level they think they should, then you're going to be dinged for it. And this is what it's going to look like. Y'all know you're going to have an annual evaluation. What's going to make up that? I should say it first. This is the state-assessed areas we're talking about, years 1 and 2 after implementation of the bill. Your annual evaluation, those 2 years, will look like this. 15% of the score will be on parent and student surveys. 30% of the evaluation will be on test scores. Now, you'll have an additional measures of 55%, of which 45% of that's observations. You will have 2 observations a year. They can be announced or unannounced, and you know they're going to be unannounced, and you know one of them is going to be the day before Christmas break. There's going to be another 10% of other. Other is a growth formula that they are going to decide at the Department of Education. Now, they do have to tell you ahead of time, which is very nice of Mr. Marsh to put in the bill, that they're going to have to tell you before the year starts what you're going to be measured on, but right now we really don't know what that's going to be. So they're going to take all these numbers, they're going to put them together, and that's your annual evaluation. Now, moving over to the next little bubble here, we're talking about how they're going to determine your level of effectiveness. 45% of the level of effectiveness is actually figured out by the students who reach their goal. That number that the computer spits out, 45% will be made up of the number of students that reach their goal. Then 55% will be evaluations. Well, 30% of that 55, as we know, was test scores. And so in actuality, 62% of your final score, the level of effectiveness, is made up of assessments. So look at this. You're getting dinged or benefiting, which I really doubt with this crazy unscientific formula that is VAM, that this is actually going to help you. But 3 different times assessments are going to come up, once in the annual evaluation and twice now in determining the level of effectiveness. So 62% of that level significantly exceeds expectation, down to significantly below expectations. 62% of that is based on these student assessments, on standardized testing that we know is flawed. It is inaccurate. We also know that it is a disadvantage for our high poverty children and for our English language learners. We know, we talked about how many times that these children are being set up for failure. Well, guess what? You're getting set up for failure 3 different times, once in the annual evaluation and 2 more times in the determining your level of effectiveness. And this is wrong. I am going to urge all of you to call your legislators and tell them to say no to this bill. Now we're going to move on to year 5. Year 3 and 4 is going to be slightly different. And then year 5 will be the final version of it that will be the way it is going to be for the rest of the time the bill is in effect. What's going to change is in your annual evaluation, that 10% of other disappears. It doesn't exist any longer. Now your test scores are going to be worth 40%. Your survey is still 15%, and your additional measures, which is still your 2 observations, is 45%. So then we move that over to the determining level of effectiveness, and so it's going to affect that evaluation number. The other numbers are still the same, but now 40% of the 55 is 22. So 22 and 45 is now 67. You are up to 67% of your evaluation is going to be based on these flawed assessments. I just can't emphasize enough how inaccurate these tests are. You guys really need to Google it. Educate yourselves on these things. There's a site called Bamboozled. You definitely need to go to that site. Find out more about this because, teachers all across the country are being subjected to these things. In 14 different states, they are already in litigation over it, trying to get rid of it. A couple of states, they have gotten rid of it. So I don't understand why we are being out of backwards and bringing things into this state that we already know do not work. The only reason I can think of is because they want to get rid of the tenured teachers. They want you all out the door. They want to have a lot of new folks up in there that haven't taught under the best practices, and they'll be more impressionable, and they won't have tenure, so they're more apt to fall in line and do what is being told of them because they're going to be afraid and they don't want to lose their jobs. The badass teachers are 55,000 strong all across this country. They study this stuff. They know all about charters and vouchers and VAM. I urge you to join that organization. Here, pause this, read it, study it, and know exactly what you're getting into. Marsh does not have the best interest of the students or of the educators. He's not showing respect to anybody. And we need to send a strong signal to him that this is not going to be tolerated in Alabama. Join the Alabama Bats and join us in this fight against the raise bill in Alabama.